does God, in fact, influence the decisions you make here and that you made as a lawmaker?
Yeah, I think that my personal faith is obviously part of me. It's who I am. I mean, I grew up the grandson of a Baptist preacher, married into, as in my old family being German descent, Lutheran, my wife and I, when we got married. And so faith plays a role in my life, kind of like a lot of people. I think that for most of us, it depends on that moment in time, that walk in our journey per se, of maybe how much it plays a role, or whether you're at that high point in life or that low point in life, or the two extremes that seems like people talk about God plays a role in their life. So I would say yes, obviously that's something that plays a role for me, but it's not something that I try to wear on my shoulder every single day to kind of as a marker for everything that I do in life. But it plays a role for me without a doubt.
A big deal last session was your bill regarding abortion and different limitations or restrictions put on that. What played into, bringing that bill forward?
Well, I think obviously that was a couple years ago, and that was a very long summer, pretty rough summer, needless to say, a very emotional summer for a lot of people, whether you were for the legislation or opposed to the legislation. And if I look at the 12 years that I've served in the legislature, and even now in this new role, that the fact is to me, there's times that I would say my faith plays a larger role than any other time. It's in the times that you have what you would perceive as kind of a ultimate weakness, a moment of where do I go, how do I turn, what direction do I go to? And I think on the flip side, it also is that moment in time when you have absolute power or strength, and that's when people abuse their power and strength. And I think that the faith is the time that you know that we're only here for a certain time in life, and you can't take anything with you. And so therefore, at least for me, those two extremes are the times that my faith plays a role. But specifically to last summer, it was a rough time. I mean, it was a time when you couldn't hardly hear on the Senate floor. You could be a foot away from me and yell as loud as you wanted to, and I might could read your lips, and that's all I could hear. And concerns for people calling my house late at night. Doesn't feel too good with a wife and 3 young children. So there was a lot of emotion, and obviously at some points in those difficult times it played a role, just like it did in pretty much a lot of other legislation that I dealt with.
You turned to your faith when it came to pro-life, of course. Not to say that people on the other side of the issue aren't faithful.
Right.
How do you hash that out as far as people who reach a different conclusion on an issue based on their definition of God?
Well, I think as you look around the world, there's a lot of different religions, and people have a lot of different faiths. If, say, for example, myself, as someone who's a Christian, there's different denominations, and they break out on different issues, even though they may have the same basic premise. And so therefore, to me, I just kind of look at life, what is it that made me who I am? My upbringing, my parents, grandparents, family, sibling, faith, all of those are part of that mix. There might be some real bad stuff that happens in your life, but if you look back and say, I wish that didn't happen, you wouldn't be who you are today. And so therefore, to me, other people have different faiths, and I think my role is to respect their opinions and their values, and hopefully by having a good dialogue of communication and a free speech opportunity to communicate, then you get to ultimately, hopefully, a better conclusion. I think the most thing is important is you respect someone else's opinions and beliefs.
Here, your role is numbers, a lot of numbers.
Lots.
How does your faith, being that you can't file legislation anymore and latch on to a specific issue, how does that translate with how you run the numbers game for the state?
Well, for me, there's almost, as I was explaining to somebody last night, there's almost 2 parts of this job. So the part of the job, which is the first 5 months, when I get sworn into office, and then the 140 days in legislative session, and then starting next Tuesday, knock on wood if they adjourn and sine die and don't come back for a special session, really starts the second phase of this job. And so therefore, to be able to answer your question as of up to this moment in time, a lot of that is not just the daily task of overseeing an agency, interfacing with my staff, but also dealing with the legislature and the legislative pressures that come with that, and also communicating with my constituents now gets to be 254 counties and 26 million people. And so I think really for me, my faith is about just trying to be someone who's open, honest, transparent, and I'm just an average person. I'm just the same as anybody else. We all have our strengths and we all have our weaknesses. And I think for me, my faith is knowing that I'm just as basic human as everybody else, and I'm just going to try to make the best decisions that I can and be open and honest about it.
As I mentioned, we hear God mentioned in press releases a lot on the floor in the different debates. People watching the Ledge feed or the live stream, should they be surprised? I mean, you think maybe separation of church and state. How does that work, though, that when you're hearing God mentioned or invoked so much in different issues?
Well, that I can only speak for myself. Obviously, I hear what other people say in different situations, whether it's in the legislature, whether it's elected officials, whether it's people testifying before a committee that come up here as citizens to be able to come have that opportunity to testify and speak on their behalf. For me, I can only speak, again, for Glenn Hegar. And for Glenn Hegar, I rarely invoke saying, well, in the name of God, or my faith leads me to believe. I think you just lead by your actions or your inactions. And again, I don't think you have to put it as a big patch on your shoulder. You are who you are, and your faith leads you at times, but I don't think you have to go advocate it to everybody else in the rest of the world. I think more so than anything else, you lead by example.
And when it comes to, your faith-based system and maybe something in law, which one do you turn to as far as which one wins?
I don't know if there's ever really been a situation where I would sit and question that, is it my faith or is it the law? Because hopefully they always match up together. And so therefore, I would say in conscience, in all the decisions that I've made in the legislative process or here, which is just, I'd almost want to say thousands, but it's got to be in the tens of thousands by now, because you think about how many decisions you make in a given day, just in your average life, much less pieces of legislation, or does this word go into a piece of legislation or that word change. And so therefore, I wouldn't say for me, it's been as though, well, let me look at this word from my faith perspective, because your faith has been part of you, for me, for 44 years now.
But it doesn't apply with pro-life. I mean, Roe versus Wade has it in law, yet, your belief is that, life begins and...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have very strong convictions on that, like several other things in life. And so we could say, well, that's because of your faith. That could be a lot of various things, but obviously my faith has played a role in that, to say without a doubt. Now, was it my faith that led me to agree to carry the legislation or to draft the legislation or work on every single word? That may not be the litmus test as you're working on it, but obviously faith plays a role in a lot of what we do every single day.
Anything else to add that I didn't hit on as it pertains to the broad topic of God and government?
I think you can go in so many different directions, but I think the fact is for most people here, whether it's legislators or the public, whether people talk about their faith, well, I'll give you one example. One of the things that I have been amazed at here in this office, that people in the Comptroller's office talk about the CPA family. And whether you're aware or not, here about a month ago, I lost my mother, 61 years old. A little bit too early to lose a mom at 61 years old. And until you go through it, it's kind of like having kids. You don't know what it's like. It's kind of like being married. Until you go through it, you don't know what it's like. There's so many things that people can tell you about it, but till you experience. And the thing that I've been most amazed by is that as I have received sympathy cards, condolence cards from a wide variety of people that I've interacted with over my 44 years in life, at least here in this office, it has been amazing to me that how many employees, even though I walk down the building, I toured 2 of my field offices in Dallas yesterday, shaking hands. Rarely do you talk about faith. But as I open those cards, person after person after person after person after person, some may simply say, I'm sorry. Some have sent me scripture, quotes, written things down in there of faith. And my point is this. The question is looking at legislators, elected officials talking about it and invoking it on the floor. And I think that a lot of people use it, but they may not talk about it as openly. And I've seen that in those cards here recently it's been pretty well overwhelming. I have just been pretty much knocked over by that. So I think that that's why I said a lot of people use that throughout their lives, a lot more than you think it does. You just don't see that in a press release.
A life-changing event.
Mm-hmm.
Comptroller, thank you so much.
Glad to be.
Appreciate it.